And thank you, Athar, for having me on your jury. It's a real honor. And I think I want to begin by expressing a couple of words of appreciation for what you've done. I think the artwork that you've created, obviously, but also the text that you've written, it was really a pleasure to read and to reflect on, to think about. One of the things that struck me in particular in the interview, because you've included a couple of interviews at the end of the dissertation, and then you also reflect on your practice as a teacher, because you teach sculpting as well in Antwerp. And one of the things that struck me is how you insist with your students, if I remember correctly, that you insist with your students that they should take their work seriously, right? That it is not play, that it is not simply having fun, but that it's actually quite serious business, although maybe that last word is not the best choice of words that I could choose. I think this seriousness is also reflected quite prominently in the work that you've shared with us in the dissertation that you've written, and I appreciated that a lot, I should say. Otherwise, I will ask a couple of questions. I think they will be two, although my first question has been preempted to a certain extent by the discussion, by the way in which the discussion that you had with Professor Evans developed. Because what I want to ask about is the question of intention and the role that intention plays in your understanding of violence, although I don't think we need to dwell on this, because I think that this has been touched upon quite elaborately in your discussion with Professor Evans. I share a certain reluctance to dissociate one's understanding of from the idea of intentionality, right? So I am myself make a distinction, say, between the use of force on the one hand, and then violence on the other hand. And what separates the two would be right intention, right? The use of force without right intention is violence, so to speak. But I know that is a conservative understanding of what violence is about, and so I will not push you on this at this moment. What I do want to talk with you about is the role that intention plays in your understanding of what doing sculpture is, right? In sculptural practice. You use a definition of sculpture that refers to Michelangelo, where he talks about the act of removal, right? By force of removal. And I have been wondering, you could put it in terms of, okay, would Michelangelo agree that this is a full definition of sculpture, right? Would I agree that it's a full definition of sculpture? And would you not have to include an element of intention somehow in what you're doing when you're sculpting? Also, this intention, right? Being intentional about what you're doing, being deliberate about what you're doing what you're doing, removing stone with a certain attitude, maybe in a certain mood, if you will. Could that be part of the definition, right? And could it also have an influence on how one assesses the violent nature of sculptural practice, right? So that is the first thing that I want you to reflect on.
Yes, Jorg, thank you for your question. Okay. Yes, I used the definition of sculpture by Michelangelo exactly because it was so vague. Because I wanted to try to find a more less ambiguous definition of sculpture. I wanted to define sculpture. What is sculpture? And then when one of the greatest comes with a quote saying that sculpture is anything that has to do with removal, first of all, I questioned that. And then I use it as a starting point to see, okay, if everything that has to do with removal is sculpture, let's see how far I can go with removing stuff, and let's see if this is still going to be perceived as sculpture or not. So the intention in that way was taking the decision of applying certain methodologies that are not orthodox and provocatively applying them to a block of stone to see, first of all, what would happen, but most importantly, to see how that work would be received by the art world or by people in general, by the viewers. If you tie a block of stone to a car and you drag it around, my intention was to, first of all, experiment with new methodologies, but of course also to address issues of violence that we see on the TV and on media, people being tied to a car and dragged around, or people being thrown from buildings. So can I use those methods of violence to remove stone, therefore still being committed or still working within the sculptural realm, but then also address other issues that otherwise are not possible to address from the sculptural point of view. So basically, how can I address those things with my own practice, which I don't think the solution was by making a sculptural representation of that. I really wanted to reenact what was happening. So that was very intentional. Of course, the result on the sculpture, on the skin of the stone, let's say, was not intentional. I could not see how that would develop. So definitely there was intention also, although it was more an intention of method rather than intention of result. Because my goal was not the result. My goal was to address those issues.
Thank you, Athar. So I think what maybe I struggle with in that answer is if I tie this back to one of the things that you said originally, that even removing a slab of stone from its original natural environment is an act of arrogance somehow, right? That I think it's your exact words that you used. You appropriate that stone, you take it out of its original context, and you say, look, I have the powers to do so, and that must imply that I have the right to do so. And even if I do not have the right to do so, I act upon my impulse, right? I remove, or I let other people remove it, and then I. So that, and then I would think, and I think you agree actually, given also the advice that you give to your students, that you would have then to treat that slab of stone with utmost respect somehow. You have to make the most of it, right? Given the violence that you've done, right? Is that something that you would agree with?
Yes, absolutely. But in this context, with respect, it doesn't mean, because first of all, understand that stone carving is totally aggressive. So is that a gesture of love and respect? No, because if you do the exact same gesture on a person, you're seriously hurting them. So that is not a gesture of love and care. So stone carving functions through destructive and aggressive actions, methodologies. And then I think that the responsibility that we have of using that block goes beyond the block itself and what you're doing with it. So it's about the results. What do you address? Are you going to make just a fountain, let's say, with little penguins on top of it, just to make something beautiful? Or are you using that stone aware of all the efforts needed to take it out, environmental efforts, to address something that is more urgent and more important? And I think that goes beyond the aggressiveness of the gesture, of course. Yeah. Also, another thing that came to my mind about internationality, you can shape stone also without having the intention of doing that. Look, for example, at pilgrims places where usually stairs made out of stone have been walked upon for thousands of years, and then they have been slowly reshaped by the people without the intention of doing so. In St. Peter in Rome, there is a statue of St. Peter with a foot that has completely been disfigured because people it's a tradition. Whenever you pass that statue, you should rub that foot, so the foot has completely gone, and it's now an abstract piece of stone. And of course, there wasn't the intention of doing it, but that happened as well. And I think that is very violent as well. Somehow, it's problematic, I know, but you can also commit great violence by caring too much for someone or something. You suppress it as well. You protect it, overprotection.
Thank you, Athar. I appreciate that answer a lot. I have a final question, and it concerns stone as a material, right? Which I think is, apart from your reflections on violence, your reflections on sculpting, I think it's the third sort of major element in the dissertation, that it's a reflection on stone and what stone is about. And one of the things that you observe and document and reflect on is the role that stone has played historically in structural violence, right? Stone has been used to create borders, or to symbolize borders, or to constitute borders. And you list a number of other ways in which stone has been used for violent purposes. And I've been thinking, we've talked about it in the pre-defense already, and I've been thinking about it since. And what my conclusion has been that yes, for now, my conclusion, depending on which answer you give, I might revise my conclusion, but I say yes, so stone clearly has this aspect, but what you can say in defense of stone and its role in structural violence is that it's honest, right? It's that it's honest, right? It's there, it's visible, right? If you approach a town wall, you know that there's a town wall, and you know that it will be difficult to get in, and you know that there's a barrier, right? While if you dematerialize structural violence, then it gets actually to be more forceful in a way, it gets to be more powerful. So is this something that you recognize, the honesty of stone in a way as a material?
Yes, although I also speak to its disguise, right? When it's used as cobblestones with beautiful patterns, it's like, well, it's not the stone, it's that we are making something which is basically oppressive. I'm speaking symbolically, and we present it with beautiful patterns, right? As if to hide that thing. And also when you read inscriptions on stones, we don't see the stone, we see the inscription. So somehow stone gets to the background then, literally to the background. But this is a very important question. What happens if you make things invisible? What happens if you remove things? And it's one of the arguments that is being used with the removal of controversial statues, for example. Should we remove them? Because if we remove them, are we actually solving the problem, or are we just hiding the issue? The issue is not the statue. The statue stands for something else I'm sure that will still be at play even if we remove those statues, right? So yes, making things invisible makes them more dangerous, of course. This is what camouflage is about. The enemy is still there, but it's less visible, so it has more probabilities to attack back, right? Speaking in military terms, but I'm referring to other things as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jorg.